The night sky over Ouagadougou has often been quiet, heavy with the weight of poverty, uncertainty, and broken promises. But on September 15, 2025, that silence was shattered. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, a man once dismissed as just another soldier in fatigues, unveiled a vision so vast, so audacious, that it has already begun to redefine what Africa can be. 10 mega-projects worth billions of dollars set into motion, not by foreign aid agencies or Western banks, but by the will of a nation determined to rise. Picture this. Africa's very first indigenous nuclear power plant, a gold refinery capable of processing 400 kilograms a day, a cement factory producing 2,000 tons daily, and more than 50,000 kilometers of new roads, all in one of the most overlooked nations on Earth. For decades, Burkina Faso was written off as least developed, an afterthought on the global map. Today, it stands at the threshold of becoming an industrial power. The numbers are staggering. The partnerships are bold: Russia for nuclear energy, China for advanced manufacturing, but with every blueprint stamped and every shovel of soil turned by Burkinabe hands. These are not scattered projects competing for attention. They are a tightly woven fabric of national transformation: nuclear energy to power factories, gold to fund development roads, to connect markets, hospitals to heal a nation, satellites to link Burkina Faso with the future. But here is the question that should haunt us all, especially those watching from America. Can a landlocked African nation, once dismissed as powerless, truly transform itself into a continental leader in just 3 years? Or is this the spark of something even greater, a model that could inspire an entire continent to rise beyond dependency? If you believe that Africa's story has been told wrong for too long, if you believe that President Ibrahim Traoré's 10 mega-projects may be the proof that real leadership can turn vision into reality, then this is your moment to listen closely. Please share this video if you want the world to know that Africa is building, not begging. And subscribe now, because the truth of Africa's rise is more important than the headlines. On the morning of September 15, 2025, President Ibrahim Traoré did not simply deliver a speech, he delivered a blueprint for the future of Burkina Faso. In front of an audience that included ministers, engineers, and students, he declared the launch of 10 mega-projects that would shake not only his country, but the entire African continent. Each project on its own would be monumental. Together they form a tapestry of transformation that promises to propel Burkina Faso from the margins of the global economy into the center of Africa's industrial future. The most ambitious of them all is the Burkina Faso nuclear power plant, the first indigenous nuclear program in Africa. Signed with Russia's Rosatom on June 21, 2025, the deal guarantees more than just electricity. It guarantees independence. Currently, only about 21% of Burkinabe households have access to power. Traoré's plan changes that forever. With technology transfer training programs and a 5-year construction timeline, Burkina Faso will not only generate its own electricity, but also supply power to its neighbors in the alliance of Sahel states. Imagine factories humming, schools lit after dark, and hospitals running without fear of blackout, all because one small nation decided to think big. If energy is the engine, then gold is the fuel of this transformation. On July 9, 2025, Traoré inaugurated the National Gold Refinery Complex just outside Ouagadougou. For decades, Burkina Faso exported raw gold, leaving billions in profits for foreign middlemen. Now the country will process 400 kilograms of gold per day, over 150 tons annually. This state-run refinery is protected around the clock with advanced security and an anti-extraction task force to prevent sabotage. It means billions of dollars will stay in Burkina Faso, funding schools, roads, and healthcare instead of vanishing overseas. Traoré's own words echo like a pledge: only the wealth of our land should build what will protect that wealth. To build a nation, you need cement, and Traoré made sure Burkina Faso would never beg for it again. On March 20, 2025, he inaugurated the Sisino Mega Cement Factory, a Chinese-backed project producing 2,000 tons daily, with plans to expand to 1.2 million tons annually. Beyond production numbers, this factory creates hundreds of jobs for young Burkinabe and introduces renewable energy and recycling into cement manufacturing. Every bag of cement that leaves the factory is more than just material, it is sovereignty proof that Burkina Faso can construct its own schools, hospitals, and homes without foreign dependence. But what good is cement and gold without roads to connect people? Traore announced an unprecedented 50,000-kilometer road network to be completed between 2025 and 2029. Unlike past projects controlled by foreign contractors, this one is led entirely by Burkinabe engineers and workers using over 900 construction machines purchased by the state. Villages will be connected to cities, farmers to markets, patients to hospitals. More importantly, this infrastructure weaves Burkina Faso into the fabric of the Sahel Confederation, linking Ouagadougou to Mali, Côte d'Ivoire, Niger, and beyond. It is not just about asphalt, it is about unity, trade, and continental integration. From the ground, Traore's vision soars into the sky. The Ouagadougou-Donsine International Airport, a $200 million project, is designed with a 4,000-meter runway to welcome the world's largest aircraft. Positioned northeast of the capital, this airport transforms landlocked Burkina Faso into a global hub. Cargo terminals will cut logistics costs, while tourism and trade will bring in new revenue streams. For decades, West African skies were dominated by Western-controlled hubs. Now Burkina Faso is preparing to fly on its own wings. These first 5 projects alone, nuclear energy, gold, refining, cement production, nationwide roads, and a global airport already redefine the destiny of a nation. Together, they create the foundation of a new Burkina Faso, powered by its own energy, funded by its own gold, built with its own cement, connected by its own roads, and open to the world through its own airport. This is not abstract planning. These projects are signed, launched, and in motion. And behind each of them is a deeper philosophy. Burkina Faso must no longer be a nation that waits for permission. It must be a nation that builds. The true climax of Traore's transformation plan came with a single stroke of a pen on June 21, 2025. On that day, Burkina Faso signed the historic nuclear energy agreement with Russia's Rosatom. For the first time in African history, a landlocked, resource-challenged country would become the continent's nuclear pioneer. The announcement electrified Ouagadougou young engineers, waving flags, university students celebrating in the streets, and ordinary families daring to imagine a future where darkness no longer defined their nights. This moment was more than symbolic. It shattered the narrative that nuclear energy was only for global powers. It sent a shockwave through Africa. If Burkina Faso could build its own nuclear plant, why not Nigeria, Ghana, or Kenya? The deal included full technology transfer training for Burkinabe scientists and a 5-year construction timeline. Suddenly, the country that had only 21% electricity access was on track to power industries, cities, and even neighboring nations within the alliance of Sahel states. As if the nuclear deal was not enough, Traore doubled down. Within weeks, fleets of 764 construction vehicles thundered across Burkina Faso, breaking ground for what would become the largest road-building program in African history, 50,000 kilometers of new roads by 2029. The sight was unforgettable: yellow bulldozers carving paths through dry earth, engineers in dusty uniforms mapping routes, children cheering as the first asphalt touched their forgotten villages. These were not foreign contractors collecting profits. These were Burkinabe workers building their own destiny with their own hands. For many citizens, this was the emotional peak. Roads meant connection, dignity, and opportunity. Farmers who had once walked miles to reach markets saw trucks approaching to carry their crops. Mothers imagined reaching hospitals without losing hours on broken dirt paths. What had long felt like a dream was becoming visible reality. But with progress came tension. Russia proudly celebrated its partnership, portraying the nuclear deal as proof of Moscow's role in Africa's rebirth. China, through its cement partnership, hailed the expansion of South-South cooperation. Yet in Western capitals, the mood was starkly different. Washington think tanks released reports warning of strategic risks. European media described the gold refinery as a challenge to global markets. Analysts in Paris muttered that Burkina Faso was slipping beyond France's influence. For the United States, the implications were especially troubling. For decades, Africa's energy, gold, and transport had been tied to Western systems. Now, a small country was aligning itself with Russia and China while declaring total independence from Western energy and financial middlemen. One headline in a London newspaper captured the fear bluntly: Burkina Faso goes rogue west, loses grip on Sahel. Inside Africa, however, the reaction was the opposite: pure inspiration. In Ghana, activists demanded their government build local refineries instead of exporting raw gold. In Kenya, student groups pointed to Burkina Faso as proof that mega projects could be achieved without IMF approval. In Mali and Niger, Burkina Faso's allies in the Sahel Confederation hailed Traore as the architect of a new regional model. For many Africans, the nuclear signing was not just a contract, it was a call to action. Traore had shown that Africa did not have to wait for permission. Leaders could think boldly, partner strategically, and still keep sovereignty intact. It was a moment that made young Africans believe that their nations too could leap forward without being chained to the past. The emotional climax was captured in a simple yet powerful scene. In Ouagadougou, children painted a mural of a glowing light bulb over the silhouette of their city. Below it, they wrote in French, "L'énergie de notre avenir," energy for our future. For the people, the nuclear deal was not about geopolitics, it was about hope. It was about seeing, perhaps for the first time, that their leaders could deliver something tangible, something world-class, something theirs. The nuclear agreement, the refineries' rising walls, the cement pouring into new foundations, and the endless roar of road machines together, they built a crescendo that shook the world. Burkina Faso, once invisible, had declared itself unstoppable. The immediate effects of Traoré's mega-projects rippled through every corner of Burkinabe society. For the first time in living memory, ordinary citizens began to see government announcements translate into tangible change on the ground. Roads were no longer just political promises, they were black asphalt stretching into villages. Gold was no longer disappearing overseas, it was being refined under national supervision. Electricity was no longer a dream, whispered at night, it was a plan laid out in engineering blueprints. The most visible change was in employment. The gold refinery alone promised 100 direct jobs and 5,000 indirect positions. The cement factory added another 400 jobs, while the massive road network mobilized thousands of drivers, engineers, and construction workers. In a country where unemployment had long fueled despair, these jobs meant dignity. Families could afford school fees, medicine, and even small luxuries that once felt out of reach. Beyond jobs, daily life was shifting. Farmers from rural communities who once walked for hours with baskets of produce now had trucks waiting to carry their crops to markets. Women, often forced to spend entire days fetching water, looked forward to the Ziga 2 dam project bringing clean water to over 1 million people. For many, these were not statistics, they were life-changing milestones. One of the most profound projects was the Bobo Dioulasso University Hospital. For decades, sick Burkinabe had to travel to Europe for specialized care, often at crushing costs. Now, advanced medical equipment research labs and training programs would be housed within Burkina Faso's own borders. Young medical students celebrated knowing they could study at home instead of seeking education abroad. Parents rejoiced that their children would have access to care without crossing oceans. Education, too, was being transformed. Partnerships within these projects included technical training in nuclear science, engineering, and medicine. For the first time, Burkina Faso was producing not just workers, but experts. A generation of young Burkinabe was being trained to manage nuclear reactors, design infrastructure, and lead research programs. For Traoré, the projects also reshaped his political standing. Critics had dismissed him as a military strongman with little vision beyond holding power. But with each project breaking ground, his image shifted from a soldier in fatigues to a national architect. Opposition voices found it harder to argue when citizens could see new roads being built, new factories humming, and new hospitals rising from the soil. This legitimacy extended beyond Burkina Faso's borders. Within the alliance of Sahel states, Traoré was hailed as the leader who had turned promises into results. His ability to deliver infrastructure and sovereignty projects bolstered calls for closer regional integration. Yet, with progress came new political tensions. Western governments and international corporations, long accustomed to controlling Burkina Faso's resources, saw their influence shrinking. Analysts warned that the refinery and the national gold vault challenged global supply chains. The nuclear plant raised alarms about security, with European media hinting at regional instability. Domestically, too, there were risks. Managing such massive projects required transparency, efficiency, and long-term planning. Critics questioned whether corruption could undermine progress. Others feared that reliance on Russian and Chinese partnerships might create new forms of dependency. Still, the emotional climate inside Burkina Faso was undeniable pride, optimism, and a renewed belief in national destiny. In Ouagadougou, murals of Thomas Sankara appeared alongside images of Traore symbolizing a continuity of revolutionary spirit. In villages, children played on roads freshly paved, unaware that their laughter was part of a transformation bigger than themselves. Politically and socially, Burkina Faso was no longer the forgotten nation of the Sahel. It was becoming a laboratory of sovereignty, where development was not outsourced but owned, where progress was not imported but built. The civil and political consequences were clear. A nation once written off was now writing its own future. From Washington to Paris, from Beijing to Moscow, Traoré's 10 megaprojects have become more than domestic policy, they are a global statement. For the first time in decades, a small West African country is rewriting the rules of development without asking permission from the traditional powers. In the United States, analysts are divided. On one hand, think tanks warn that Burkina Faso's partnership with Russia on nuclear energy and with China on cement production signals a loss of Western influence in the Sahel. Headlines in U.S. newspapers describe a strategic setback, framing the projects as a pivot away from American-backed systems. The gold refinery is especially alarming for Washington. By processing 150 tons of gold domestically, Burkina Faso bypasses Western-controlled markets and vaults. For U.S. policymakers, this threatens not only financial flows, but also the larger narrative of who controls Africa's wealth. Yet some American voices see opportunity. Could U.S. companies invest in Burkina Faso's growing aviation, healthcare, or technology sectors? Could Washington rethink its approach from control to partnership? These questions now hang heavily in diplomatic circles, forcing the U.S. to confront its decades-old strategies in Africa. In Europe, the reaction is more openly anxious. France, long the dominant power in Burkina Faso's affairs, has watched contracts and influence slip away. French media accuse Traoré of turning his back on democracy while simultaneously lamenting the billions in lost business opportunities. In London and Brussels, policymakers worry that the Sahel could become a bloc resistant to European economic and political leverage. The symbolism is hard to ignore. Airports, roads, and even satellites no longer flow through Western channels, but through African and Eurasian partnerships. For Russia, the nuclear deal is a diplomatic victory. It presents Moscow as a trusted partner capable of delivering high-technology solutions where the West has failed. For China, the cement factory and road infrastructure demonstrate Beijing's long-term strategy of embedding itself in Africa's industrial rise. Both powers frame these partnerships as evidence of a multipolar world, one where Africa is no longer bound to Western oversight. Across the continent, the story resonates like wildfire. In Ghana, public debate centers on whether Accra should replicate Burkina Faso's refinery model. In Nigeria, commentators ask why Africa's largest oil producer still imports refined fuel, while a much smaller neighbor builds value-added industries. In Kenya and South Africa, university students cite Traoré as proof that sovereignty-driven development is possible. Burkina Faso's trajectory has become a continental mirror. If this small, landlocked nation can defy the odds, what excuse do larger, resource-rich nations have? The question is uncomfortable, but it is also liberating, reminding Africans that dependency is not inevitable. Perhaps the most profound impact is on global perception. For decades, Africa was portrayed in Western media as a land of crisis, famine, war, and aid dependency. Traoré's projects disrupt that storyline. Now international outlets are forced to cover a different Africa, one of nuclear plants, refineries, highways, and satellites. This is not charity. This is engineering, planning, and sovereignty. For older Americans, watching the parallels are striking. Just as the United States once launched the New Deal or the Marshall Plan to rebuild itself, Burkina Faso is using its resources to chart a bold national course. The difference: Burkina Faso is doing so without the financial leash of the IMF or World Bank. In the eyes of the world, these 10 megaprojects are more than construction sites. They are a declaration that Africa is no longer content to be managed, it is ready to lead. And for America, the choice becomes clear: continue to view Africa through the lens of control, or embrace a partnership with a continent rising on its own terms. The story of Burkina Faso under Ibrahim Traoré is not simply a catalog of construction projects. It is the rebirth of an idea that Africa can rise through its own will, its own wealth, and its own vision. 10 mega-projects now stretch across the map: a nuclear plant promising energy independence, a gold refinery securing billions once stolen by foreign middlemen, cement factories producing with African resources, tens of thousands of kilometers of new roads, airports, hospitals, dams, satellites, and even a mausoleum that ties today's struggle to the revolutionary past of Thomas Sankara. But with every bold step forward comes the shadow of resistance. History tells us that whenever African nations attempt true sovereignty, outside forces react. From sanctions to sabotage, from media disinformation to covert interference, the tools are many. Already murmurs from Paris, London, and Washington hint at risks and instability. These words often precede attempts to slow or even reverse progress. The danger is real. Burkina Faso's independence will not be celebrated by all, it will be challenged. Yet the deeper question is, can this transformation endure? Can a nation so long marginalized sustain such momentum without being crushed by the weight of external pressure? Can President Ibrahim Traoré, still a young leader, carry this vision beyond his own lifetime, or will another generation have to rise and protect what has been built? For Americans watching, especially those old enough to remember when the United States itself built highways, power plants, and institutions after war and depression, the comparison is unavoidable. You once witnessed how infrastructure can reshape a nation's destiny. Now Africa is writing its own version of that story, led not by Western capital, but by African determination. This is where the conversation turns to you. Do you believe that President Ibrahim Traoré's strategies are truly effective? Yet, can we continue to trust him to carry the torch of sovereignty, or will the burden one day require new leaders to finish the work? Burkina Faso's 10 megaprojects are not only about one nation, they are a mirror for an entire continent, and perhaps a lesson for the world. If a landlocked country once dismissed as least developed can chart this course, then what excuse remains for larger, richer nations still trapped in dependency? Brothers and sisters, the future of Africa is being built in real time. The question is whether the world will support it or try to stop it. Please share this video if you feel you are among the first to witness Africa's rise. Subscribe if you believe the truth is more important than the headlines. And let us know in the comments, is this the beginning of Africa's century, or just the opening chapter of an even greater struggle?